So welcome, thank you for wanting to do this. I'm looking forward to having a chat with you. And my first question is, of course, what is your name and what is your SCA title?
Okay, my name is Kareina Talventyär, and my title is Varakreivitär, which is Finnish for Viscountess, or if you prefer, Maisteri, which is Finnish for Mistress, because I'm a member of the Order of the Laurel.
Thank you. How long have you played? I know that it's a long time.
I joined when I was about 15 years old, which would have been around 1982. But I first heard people who were in the SCA talking about SCA stuff when I was 12 years old. I just didn't realize that's what they were discussing. Some of the big kids at my school were talking about how this weekend they were going to fight for a girl. And at 12, I thought, oh, how barbaric. These boys are going to fight and expect her to take the victor. And a couple of years later, when I found the SCA and realized that these guys did this, I realized, no, they were not talking about fighting over her. They were going to fight for her honor.
So how did you end up in the SCA as a 15-year-old? You heard your boys talk at school talk about this.
Yeah. Well, my first love at high school, who had the best library, oh, I loved his books. He found out about the SCA through those older kids and went to a meeting or something and thought it was a fun idea. And so he decided to start his own household. So he gathered a bunch of us, and it proved so popular that in an alternative school of 200 students, there were 35 of us who were in the household.
That is a big household.
Yes. And we were doing SCA for several months before I heard them talking about this weird group of adults that did this too. And it took several months more before I had the courage to walk across the street from my house to the junior high where they held the local dance practice and start participating in dance.
Oh, so dance was like your way into...
Yeah, it was the first event that my household went to that I joined them on was an SCA wedding for a local night in Laurel in Anchorage, Alaska, the barony of Viscountess, where I was living at the time. And at that particular event, they had dancing. They had a tape of Hole in the Wall, which I later found out isn't period at all. But that tape played for 45 minutes. And we had so many people in the line that 45 minutes was only enough time to go back and forth a few times.
Wow.
But it was enough time to learn that dance. And the dancing got me really truly hooked at the beginning. And the next event that I went to, the Bardic Circles, finished getting me hooked. In those days in Ascalia, we had a very charismatic knight who loved to sing. And as evening rolled around, we would gather around the fireplace or in a corner, depending on the site, and we would start singing. And because he was a big burly knight, if people were getting too loud, he said, hey, talking practice was Tuesday, go somewhere else. And they would shut up and we would sing, and he encouraged everybody to sing. It didn't matter if you could carry a tune. You were welcome to participate.
Wonderful. And I'm just gonna interrupt because this is a well-known fact for me, but maybe not for everybody that will watch this. We are not talking about Drachenwald now. You mentioned Alaska and you mentioned another kingdom. So you started in what kingdom?
In the Kingdom of the West, the Principality, what would soon become the Principality of Awertha, in the barony of Viscountess, which is Anchorage, Alaska. The West Kingdom, for people who aren't aware of it, is Northern California, Alaska, and at that time, Australia, and the Orient. The Orient is still part of the West Kingdom. And I started in Alaska.
Mm. And when did you move over to Drachenwald?
In 2009, I got a postdoc position at the University of Milan in Italy and moved there. And at the time, there was one SCA family there who were associated with the embassy, and one local Italian who was the SCA contact for Italy. He mostly these days does other forms of reenactment, but he was still very welcoming.
Nice. So you started in the West Kingdom. You moved to Drachenwald in 2009. There's a huge gap between there. Have you only played in West Kingdom and Drachenwald?
No, this is my fifth kingdom.
I
moved away to the Kingdom of Atenvelt first, to the then Principality of the Sun and the Barony of Atenvelt, because my mother was at that time working for a university that had branches across the US, and she signed my boyfriend up to go. And since he was going, I went too. And I was there for about a year and a half before my mother got married and moved to Australia, and I lost my free tuition. So I went back to Alaska, to Alberta. And I was there for a few years until I finally decided what I was going to major in at university after 6 years of just taking classes for the fun of it. And of course, that wasn't available in Anchorage, so I moved to Oregon this time, to the Kingdom of Ontario, in what would later become the Principality of the Summits, in the Shire of Glendoothan, down on the southern border of Ontario, which meant we often went south to West Kingdom events as well as north to Ontarian events. And when I graduated, I went back up to Alberta, this time to the Principality, or the Barony of Wintersgate in Fairbanks, and did my master's degree. And then I fell in love with a charming bard in the Central West, and I moved down to the Principality of the Mists for several years. And then my stepfather in Australia was ill, so I went down to help out the family and met my own Australian. And I wound up doing my PhD in Tasmania in the Barony of Innisfail, and what by then had become the Kingdom of Lochak. And then after I finished the PhD, I moved to Italy, and I was there for a year and a half, and then I came up to Nordmark, and here I remain. I have been now just over 9.5 years here. This is the longest I have ever lived anywhere at one stretch.
Wow.
I have spent more total time in Alaska, but the at one stretch, this is the longest.
Yeah, especially, I mean, you were also a child and a teenager when you lived in Alaska, so yeah, that's a little different when that's different from when you are a grown-up.
My father was Air Force, so we moved a lot when I was little too. So I didn't move to Alaska till I was 9. So from 9 to 18 was the first time in Alaska was between 9 and 18, which is about the same as what I've now been in Sweden.
Wow, you have an interesting life. You've seen stuff. I mean, I knew that you, since we do know each other rather well, I do know that you have been moving around, and that you came from Alaska from the start, and yet you have lived in Lochak. Lochak. I can't pronounce that, so I'm sorry. I'm too Swedish.
That's okay.
But I had no idea that you had lived through that many kingdoms, and that you have moved around that much.
Yep.
So my next question that I have on my little questions paper here is if you have a clear persona. Well,
in the West Kingdom, you can often see bumper stickers that say, "What's persona? I'm from the West."
Aha.
So my persona is a Worthen Viscountess. Yes. Because I come from the Principality of Alberta originally. And that's about it. I have a lot of costumes from the 12th century. This is my newest costume that has not made it to an event yet. A bit of wool that I picked up in Nordmark at the winter market there. And my favorite 12th century dress, I'm having a little trouble getting into right now with the pandemic kilograms.
Oh yeah, that one. That one I have seen.
Yes.
That's a lovely one.
Yeah. But I also wear Viking boy clothes. I have a favorite pair of Thorberg trousers, the ones with the cute square butt and feet.
How cute. Oh,
yeah.
those are the ones you usually wear when you are doing acrobatic stuff, right?
Yes, they're perfect for acrobatic stuff.
Yes, because
it's not a good idea to stand on your hands when you're wearing a full skirt because they fall over your face.
Yeah.
And if you're dressed in a period manner, it could be a little embarrassing.
Yeah. I can see that. I would not be caught dead standing on my hands. I don't know if you can say that, but no, this lady do not stand on her hands. But I do admire people that do acrobatic stuff because
it's
something that I can't do. And I have seen you, and man, you're good.
If you wish to, you can train for it in baby steps.
I know.
I didn't start training for acrobatics until I was almost 50.
I think here I will actually cut in. I happen to have on file you doing acrobatic stuff because you sent that to me when I was doing another video for the women of the SCA. So I might cut in here with a little bit where we can actually see you do stuff.
Okay.
And yes, we had done the persona question, and I also asked, have you registered your name and device?
I have.
You have.
My name was registered back in the 1980s as Kareina Talventyär because while my mother is of Finnish ancestry and could speak a little Finnish because she was 7 years old when her grandparents passed away, and after that no one spoke Finnish anymore, she couldn't do grammar. So the College of Heralds passed Kareina as made-up Russian, and Talvi is the Finnish word for winter, and Tuttar is the Finnish word for daughter. It wasn't until the first time I was in contact with a Drachenwald person from Arnimetsä that I learned that the name should be Talventyär, all one word, and you change the I at the end of Talvi into an EN when you join them together. And that was in the 90s by email contact. There's a woman in Arnimetsä whose SCA last name is, in fact, Talventyär. And so she decided that we are cousins. I eventually met her after I moved to Drachenwald, and we are in fact cousins. She's a delightful person. And she promised me documentation. So that, because of course the College of Heralds won't let you change your registered name without documentation as to why, if what you're doing is grammar issues. And she didn't get around to it. So finally, some years after I moved here, I was at a cudgel war and I sat down with Petteri, who has a PhD in Finnish naming practices. And he helped me write up the documentation and we sent it in. And the College of Heralds sent it back for insignificant documentation.
What?
So he wrote them a new letter with more photocopies, and this time it was registered properly.
And your device, I can see behind you, it's the very cute sleeping dormant kitty.
Yes, Azure V2, a long-haired domestic cat, dormant argent.
You can blazon it.
Yes. Yes, I have been able to blazon it since it registered the year I was 18. So.
Okay. Yeah, you have been doing this for a while.
No. I'm a lot older than I think I am.
Well, you're so young.
Yeah. But the cat has an interesting story in how I got that particular field division. Because back when I first went to register my arms, they were still telling women in the SCA that men display their coats of arms on a shield because they are warriors, and women are not warriors, and therefore they should display theirs on a lozenge, which is to say a diamond. And at that point, I was 17 years old, and it's like, no way is anybody going to tell me what I have to do because I'm a woman.
Good for you.
When I expressed my displeasure with this, the herald said, well, tell you what, we can register your arms on a V2. The V2 is the white part on the outside of the cat. It is physically impossible to display a V2 on a lozenge because it's everything outside the lozenge. And therefore, nobody would ever display my arms on a lozenge.
I love this. Women doing what they want. I also love, of course, being a crazy cat lady, having a device with a cat on my own. I love it. And your device was actually an inspiration for my device a bit. But then I learned that nowadays you are not allowed to register dormant kitty anymore.
Really?
So,
why not?
I don't know, but they told me that sleeping cats are not allowed anymore. They have to be sitting or rampant, or
I am really glad I'm grandfathered in, because a catnap is the perfect coat of arms for me.
Yeah, it would have been for me too, even though I might suspect that our could have been in conflict, since we probably would have chosen sort of the same colors.
I would have given you permission to conflict.
Aw, thank you. But yeah, so I got a sleeping kitty instead, but I do admire your sleeping kitty, because cats, speaking about cats, here comes one. Sleeping, he demands to be in all the interviews, I think. Don't you? Yeah. So, I mean, cat napping, that's kind of their thing, so I love your device. Anyhow, moving on to your first really good SCA memory. And I guess, well, you were talking about dancing.
Yeah, that first event where we danced 45-minute hole in a wall was such a magical time. I think that counts as my first really amazing SCA memory.
Yeah, that's what got you hooked.
Yeah. And then from there going on to the many hours of Bardic circles, there is nothing like being in a room with 100 people all singing the same song, the power and the magic.
Yeah.
Although one of the best, at the 30-year celebration, which was held in the Kingdom of Varakreivitär, one of my friends, Dick Frederick of Holland in the West Kingdom, who has been playing SCA since the very first event and loves the Bardic arts, for his birthday party at that event, he held a Bardic circle at his encampment, which was well attended by people from all over the known world, since it was an anniversary event and there were people from all over the known world. And Frederick is very well known because he has lived in more than one kingdom and makes it to Pansy often. So there we were, hundreds of people gathered around, and they were all singing the song To the West, which is a really amazing, powerful song. And some of them were singing in voice parts because it's been arranged for a choir. And when that was done, the then king of Drachenwald, Gerrit von Kopke, stood up and announced to Flig that he hadn't realized that it was going to be Flig's birthday and he wasn't prepared with a gift. And he took a knife and cut some pearls off of his garb and presented them to Flig. And another king stood up. I think he might have been from Kaid. I didn't know that one. and took a Damascus dagger from his own belt sheath and presented that to Fleeg.
Wow.
And just, to be there with all of this amazing music as kings are giving, it was so magic.
Yeah, I can imagine totally.
Yeah. And that was 30 years, so we're talking more than 20 years ago, and I still tear up to think about this.
Yeah, I can see the little wet in the corner of the eye. Yeah. It sounds amazing. I mean, just sitting there with all the music and 100 people singing is one thing, but then to have those very emotional moments with the gifts from the kings to your friend, that sounds amazing. So what's your favorite event? And this is going to be interesting because you can talk about a lot of events from a lot of kingdoms.
Well, these days, my favorite event is Norstensfest when I'm running it here. But I stole the idea from my favorite event in the West Kingdom. The Principality of the Mists has a competition every year for the Bard of the Mists. And they run that event as an all-day feast. The doors open in the morning and people come in and there is already snacks on the table. And you sit down and they serve the first round of food sometime at around 10 or 11 in the morning. And as you've had a little bit of time to eat, then all of the entrants who wish to become the Bard of the Mist for the next year get up and perform their first round piece, which would be an actual medieval piece that they have researched. After the performances are done, all of the former Bards of the Mist leave the room with the Prince and Princess to discuss how the round went and who they thought their best candidate was. Because while they call it a competition, this is actually a job interview. And so they're discussing the candidates. Meanwhile, there's other entertainment. Maybe there's dancing, maybe there's some board games. Then they bring out more food. There's another round of contests. The judges go away to deliver. We have more entertainment, more dancing, more games. This repeats for 5 full rounds of food and competition. So the first one is at like 10 in the morning and the last one's like 7 p.m. Somewhere in there, the Prince and Princess will have court. And at the end of the day, they will choose the winner to serve as the Bard of the Mist for the next year. And their regalia is a beautiful cloak. I have always loved this event, and I thought that we needed something like that here. So a few years ago, when the Shire of Frostheim, where I live now, the person who had autocrated their annual Norstensfest, the Feast of the Northern Lights, was ready to take a break and said, does anyone else want to? I said, I would love to. Can I do this really cool thing and steal this idea from the West Kingdom? And people said, yeah, sure, why not? We've adapted a little for Sweden since we decided that this would be, the Norstensbard would just be for the northern part of Nordmark, because Nordmark, as you well know, is a very long principality. Yeah. It can take 20 hours to drive from here to the southernmost shire. And it's not very convenient to try to have a bard for the whole group, because then traveling becomes a bit expensive. So we thought, just for our northern branches, from here to the next closest, it's only an hour and a half. Then one after that is another hour and a half. The one after that is 3 hours. That's far enough. And since we didn't have a local prince and princess, and in fact, the Prince and Princess of Nordmark couldn't make it to our first event, we can't have them as judges. And besides, this is Nordmark. We vote on things. Yeah, it's not a medieval thing to do, but we do it. So instead, we gave everybody present beans to vote, 1 for each round. And we decided that instead of 5 rounds, 4 was enough. So we have our period round, our piece that the bard wrote in a period style, one that the bard writes in advance of the event to the theme chosen for that event. And just like they do in the Miss, 3 words out of a hat. Draw your 3 words, you've got 15 minutes, write something and perform it.
I have wanted to participate in the Norrskens bardic event for so many times. I never managed to go there though. I had hopes for this fall, but well, then Corona happened.
Well, you actually have a chance this fall. We're going to do a hybrid event.
Oh.
We're going to have an in-person event, max 40 people attending, this being Sweden and 50 is legal.
Yeah.
And that way, and the hall we normally have it in, so 40 people will be rattling around in this hall, so we'll be able to socially distance. But we're also going to have video live stream and video bardic workshops.
Cool.
I have got a variety of bards in other kingdoms who are going to Zoom in to teach workshops. So if you can't make it this far north and Corona, it's probably safer to participate from home.
Yeah.
You can still watch the competition and participate from home, because this year the cloak is not going to pass.
No.
Our current Norrskens bard hasn't had a chance to wear that cloak to events. So this is a practice round competition. We will do the competition just like normal, but we'll skip the voting and we won't pass on the cloak. So you are, please come and join us virtually.
Oh yes. Oh yes, I will. This is great news. I will absolutely take part of this.
That's okay.
Could you please? I'm trying to work here. No, it's not. Okay, now he's on the camera. So I'm so sorry.
Not a problem.
Well, the channel is called Annoyed Kitten, so there will be cats.
Yes.
It sounds amazing, and I will be happy to participate. And yes, I will look into this, and I encourage everybody that's listening to do that too. Because I mean, even if you don't participate, you can always, tune in and listen. Because we do have a great amount of good bards in Drachenwald.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we have a good amount of music people in SCA at the whole, but
yes.
So, moving on to more of our questions. What are you doing most with this hobby? What is keeping you to this hobby? We know that you started with dancing.
Mm-hmm.
Has that been a continue?
Oh yes. If there is dancing, I will dance. If there is music and singing, I will be there to participate. Stitching. I love hand sewing and embroidery. That's what I have my leaves for. The knoll-binding is so addictive. It's so much easier sewing when you're having a conversation than sewing fabric, because the stitches are so much bigger, so you don't have to see as well. So it's just a perfect thing to sit and fidget with while you're hanging out and talking to people. And it feels like sewing air when you start, because you start there with some yarn on your thread and nothing in your other hand, and you take a stitch in the air, and then you take another stitch in the air, and pretty soon fabric is appearing as you sew the air to itself.
Well, I have never got around to learn knoll-binding. I tried, not my thing, but I do knit, so I kind of understand, because when I knit, it's also like, the hands kind of work a little bit by themselves, so you don't have to look at what you're doing as much as when you're sewing.
Yeah.
But knoll-binding for me, it is a bit of magic, how you start and how you just, like you say, do it in the air, and then suddenly stuff appears.
Yeah.
So,
I've also done a little bit of woodworking. Years ago, I built armor. I haven't fought in years, but I made my armor and my helmet. We only hired out the welding. Well, hired out. My knight's other squire is a professional welder. So he just took it to work and did it. Didn't even charge us.
Ooh, that's great.
Yeah.
What keep you going? Well, how do you handle the SEA now during the pandemic? What are you doing with the SEA if you are doing?
I'm attending, certainly not all of them, but quite a few of the Bardic circles, at least 2 or 3 a month, even if it means getting up at 4 in the morning or staying up until after midnight. I'm sewing. This new tunic was made entirely during the pandemic, and the under tunic I made specifically for Zoom calls this summer. It's my old favorite linen dress from when I lived in California, because of course it's too hot there to wear wool in the summer. And I had worn this poor dress out. And it's been sitting in the mending closet for years, and I pulled it out for the pandemic and fixed it up because the underlayer I can wear all by itself on a hot summer day without sweating. And since it has a bit of a decorative neckline, I can wear it and look medieval to the online gatherings. I've made it to online courts a few times and a couple of workshops. I have been really bad. There's been hundreds more classes and workshops than I've had the time or energy to attend, because I've got a lot of other things to do, like, gardening, work, studies.
Yeah, you have a mundane life too.
And planning for, okay, well, what are we going to do for Norseman's Fest? It took me months to decide, are we even going to try meeting at all? But since Nordmark's doing quite well, I decided, yeah, we'll try it as a very small gathering. And right now I'm putting together a bid for a Kingdom event next year.
Yes, I know. So planning, online meetings, doing a little bit of that, a little bit of that.
Yeah, and occasionally I make it to the Frosttime Archery gathering on Sundays, but since I don't do archery myself, because that involves standing out in the sun, and I don't stand in the sun if I can avoid it, I don't make it every time, but sometimes.
So I have one more question for you before we're going to start rounding things up. We were discussing in my interview that I had before this, the difference between kingdoms. And since you have been through so many kingdoms, because we were talking about the difference between Drachenwald and the American kingdoms as general. Because I have only been to Great Western Wars as an American event. And that was a couple of thousands people. It was huge, it was loads of fun, but it was also very, very different for me from a Drachenwald event. Since we normally have a normal event that's not a camping event, has around somewhere between 50 to 100 people. And then we have the camping events that has, like, I think the top for Double Wars or Cudgel might be 500 people. And that might be exaggerating. I don't have exact numbers, but it's still
somewhere in the 300 to 500 range.
Yeah, it's like 300 to 500, somewhere there, depending on year. But just the size of them are different. So what is your take on this? What is?
Well, I have seen all extremes. I have lived in far outlying corners of the known world. I spent one winter in Kotzebue, Alaska, in the canton of Innisfaltraith. That town on the far north coast of Alaska, north of the Arctic Circle, is not connected to any other city by roads at all. You must fly or take a boat in the summer. There's one barge every summer, or come in by dog team or snow machine. That particular canton, we had 5 active SCA people, and we held an event that we managed to get like 30 or 40 people to attend. So I've had that extreme.
Yeah.
I've also spent some years living in the Kingdom of Varakreivitär and some years in the central part of the West Kingdom in the Principality of the Mist. Both of those areas, we were literally doing a camping event every weekend. Drive anywhere from 3 to 14 hours every weekend to a camping event all summer long. And in California, all summer long means from March Crown to October Crown.
Yeah.
So literally, the cycle would be pack on Thursday, go on Friday, enjoy the event, come home on Sunday. Monday, do laundry. Tuesday is fighter practice. Wednesday, you've got time to fix anything that needs fixing. Thursday, you pack. Friday, you go.
Wow.
And in California, in those days, if only 300 people showed up to Crown, it was a small event.
Yeah, because that is what I have understood, that we do have really, our big events are small events for most of the other kingdoms.
Well, for the heart central core of the other kingdoms, the big cities in each kingdom. And that makes it difficult because when we were in California, I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area. If you were not on the road by 2 p.m. on Friday, you might as well wait until after 8 p.m. when the traffic had thinned enough to make it possible to get out.
Yeah, I lived through LA traffic. I know a little bit about what you mean about that. We can complain about traffic in Stockholm, but it's actually nothing compared.
But there are hundreds and hundreds of SCA branches that are a long way from their neighbors. Large parts of Ontario, most of the middle part of the US, places in Canada where the next nearest group is 3-4 hour drive away. So you only have your local branch. And then depending on your local branch, maybe that means your local events are 50 to 100 people. Maybe it means your local events are 8 to 10 people. And I have lived in every one of these types. When I'm living in the small outlying distant regions, they tend to have me hold an office. I didn't need to hold an office during the 3 years I was in the West because there were so many people holding offices, I never even heard when they came vacant.
So the idea that all American kingdoms have just huge events are wrong. There is, because when you say Friday, camping events, Friday to Sunday, that is more what I am used to with the Drachenwald event. Most Drachenwald's events are for a weekend, while I have understood that the central, now we're talking the central cities events with a couple of thousands, they are usually just one day. They are not a weekend event like we have
in Kaid in LA. They do the one-day events.
Okay.
They don't do that, and I've never actually been to an event in Kaid, but I have friends from there, so that's why I know. But in most places, they are weekend events. However, they're not always done the way they're done here. Here, we often rent a local community center or a school or something and take it over for the whole weekend, and people sleep on site on their sleeping bags on the floor. Most of the big events when I was in California, or when in Alaska, especially where I started, we would have a party in someone's house on Friday. The event would start Saturday morning and be all day Saturday late into the evening. People would either go home or to somebody's house for an after party, And then on Sunday, we would gather back at the site again, but we weren't sleeping at the site.
Okay, well, that's the difference.
Yeah, and there was one site I considered using for Norseman's Fest here that's within walking distance of my house and a beautiful site, but they said, no, you're not allowed to sleep there. And everybody locally said, no way. We don't want a site where you can't sleep. That's too important, the being able to stay up until 4 a.m. talking. We still had that in the other places, but they were smaller groups at private gatherings. If you drove a long way to the event, you'd be staying at somebody's living room, not at the site. So you'd get to know a few people really well, everyone who stayed at the same house you did, but it'd usually be 5 to 30 people at one house, and another 5 to 30 people at another house.
So do you think that we Drachenwalders tend to get to know more people by staying at the site, or is it kind of the same? You still end up in those smaller groups?
I think over the course of time, it balances out, because usually when you travel a long distance for an event, you tell the autocrat, I need crash space, and you just get divvied up randomly. So you're meeting new people each time. So over the course of time, you'll still get to know the same number of people, but you won't necessarily have as many long conversations with the same people on one weekend. And I really, really love the long events here, the fact that summer vacation is normal in Drachenwald, unlike in the States. So there are so many 10-day events here. There are, I think, I've never actually been to Pensick. And I think that's the only regular over 2 full weekends and a week in the middle event, other than the big things like 20-year celebration in Texas, which I went to, 30-year celebration in Ontario that I went to. Those were 10-day events, but mostly maybe it's a holiday weekend, so you get 4 or 5 days.
Yeah, I think Great Western Wars, when I was there, I've been there 2 times. I think that is 5 days.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
I never actually made it to Great Western Wars. When I was living in the Central West Kingdom, my partner at the time was a fighter who really loved wars. However, he had custody of his son on the weekends, and when I moved in with him, his son was 5, and when I moved away, his son was 8, and he did not want to bring his small son to a big war that far from the rest of his friends. He could take him to local wars in the West because Bear had enough friends that he could just hang out with, but he didn't want to leave him completely unsupervised while he was off at the big war field. Well, and therefore we didn't, and that weekend happened to be his son's birthday.
Oh.
So you really don't want to leave your son alone.
No, you don't. No, you don't.
So he didn't start going to Great Western until his son grew up and started fighting.
Yeah, and then we're into this. Kids in the SCA learn to fight at a very young age. Some of them, at least.
Yep.
We were talking about that in our on my other interview with Joel. That there are kids now that he have watched grown up into the society, and he thinks this is a fantastic thing because they learn kind of the traits of their parents and the parents' friends in the society. So it's kind of, even if we don't mean it to be, it still ends up being a little bit like in the medieval times where you learn a trade from a young age. Have you seen that in since you have been playing so long?
Yes. And also remember, I joined when I was 15.
Yeah.
And I actually know an awful lot of people who joined like I did on our own at 15. I never could talk my parents into joining. I tried. I brought mom and my stepdad occasionally, and they thought it was interesting to see once every 5 or 6 years. but they wouldn't participate.
No.
But the kids learning from an early age, I will never forget one time when I was in Innisfail in Australia. We were at Vita practice, and there was a new boy who just showed up who was really keen and wanted to try fighting. He was 15, 16 years old, all arms and legs, as they often are at that age. And the Baron told his son to take the young man over and show him how to throw blows at the pell. And the kid would try to throw, and he was so awkward and gangly and didn't know how to move his body. And the Baron's son, who was also 15 or 16, threw his shots like a crisp, polished knight. And I looked at that contrast of night and day. And I looked at the Baron and I said, you gave him his first sword when he was 3, didn't you? And he smiled and said, yep.
Yeah. So I think it's a fantastic thing within the SCA that we see these kids that have either started very early or grown up in it and learned these old craft things. Because it's not just fighting, it's also sewing and dancing, singing, making music.
SCA children, especially those with parents who are in the bardic arts, oh wow. That child that my former boyfriend had, when I moved to California because Colin had won the Bard of the West competition. We'd been dating long distance for a while, but when he won the Bard of the West competition, I wanted to be there to see his performances. His son has also been Bard of the West.
Yeah.
Because he grew up with it. I have an SCA mother in Awertha, and she was Awertha's first Bardic Laurel. My SCA older sister, who was a babe in arms when I adopted her mother, is also an amazing bard. And very recently, at one of the online Bardic circles, I have an identical twin SCA sister in the barony of Loxolon in the Kingdom of Artemisia. She came into the Bardic circle with her 3 children. And when it was their turn to perform, the harmonies that her and her 3 children did were so out of this world amazing. And all the more contrast at a Zoom Bardic circle where everyone else was one person alone in the room. And of course, over Zoom, you can't sing together. Everyone else has to mute themselves if they're going to sing along because of the delay. So to have the contrast between a solo, a solo, a solo, a solo, 4 voices in perfect blended harmony.
I was there, I know, and it was like, oh, and I missed the singing together so much at that moment. I mean, even if I can't possibly be as good as those kids, which
you're pretty
nugs
good,
me to say, but yeah, well, I know I can hold a tune as a one, but those kids, wow. But anyhow, just, regardless of how it sounds, I mean, nothing can sound good the first time. I missed singing so much. So yes. I miss singing together with you. I miss singing together with the other people up in the north that I have done several times, even if I haven't managed to go to your Bardic Norrskens Bard. Well, I think we can end this interview with that. We miss singing together.
Yes, very much.
And
I really miss everybody singing all together. Performances of one person are all well and fine, but I am here for the singing along.
Yeah, and singing in harmony is just not done over the internet, sadly.
Well, I don't even care if it's harmony. Singing in unison is still amazing. 100 voices singing in unison is so powerful.
Yeah. So hold thumbs that we soon can meet in real life and sing together very soon. And thank you so much for participating in this interview.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. It's really wonderful to spend some time to just hang out and visit with you.
It is